All right, we'll get started right at 10 o'clock since we have a ton of stuff to cover with our speaker today, and people will continue to trickle on. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Leadership and Innovation webinar series. We are so excited to have you here for this engaging series. My name is Liz Mahalski, and I'm a program manager for Nexus at Michigan Engineering. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. You are welcome to ask questions throughout the presentation by putting them in chat or raising your hand via Zoom. We welcome the interaction. However, there will be a dedicated question and answer period following the presentation. It is now time to welcome today's speaker, Tom Willis. Tom believes that we are all born with unlimited potential. As a former classroom teacher, he also believes in the power of lifelong learning. These beliefs have shaped his primary goal in life, helping others move beyond their self-limiting beliefs so they can reach their God-given potential. Prior to co-founding Phoenix Partners, he has had the great honor of serving as the CEO of Cornerstone, a school system in Detroit. He was fortunate enough to earn his engineering degree from the University of Michigan and an MBA from the University of Notre Dame. He thanks God every day for his amazing wife and 3 children. I will now turn it over to Tom. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Liz. Thanks for having me, and I'm glad to kick off this series. Really excited for it, and honored to be here. I should have told you to leave out the Notre Dame part because that probably just sent half of the audience scrambling to go elsewhere. But it's great to be here. I love the opportunity. I love the University of Michigan. I love the state of Michigan, and I love this topic of servant leadership. So let's jump right in. And as Liz said, I'd encourage you to participate. You know, webinars are great, but they're not as great as being in person. And typically when we do our work, we're in the audience using inquiry, asking lots of questions, creating lots of discussion. So please feel free to chime in. I'm going to be asking lots of questions and asking for participation either verbally or in the chat. So please don't hold back. And so with that, let's jump right in. So today we are gonna use some inquiry together. We're gonna explore a few different things. One is 3 different tools to shape culture, and they're 3 words you've all heard, but we're gonna approach them and think about them a little bit differently. We're gonna talk about 2 emotions at sort of the root of servant leadership, and frankly, at the root of us as human beings. And then we're going to talk about this Elevate system, which is a great opportunity for you to get into your unconscious behaviors and learn a little bit more about yourself if you're interested. And as a bonus, we're going to unpack one thing that makes it so difficult to change culture. It's why billions of dollars are spent on culture change, culture improvement around the world. Even more money is spent on strategic plans. And most of that work, frankly, fails. And it's because we think they're missing this one key ingredient. So as Liz said, this is a little bit about my background. I worked for Intel. I did a co-op when I was at Michigan and out in New Mexico, and realized that I didn't really like that stuff. So I got a different job with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Chicago. I got fired from that job because the dot-com explosion happened and a few thousand of us lost our jobs, and it was really pretty life-defining moment for me. I went over to Africa to spend some time with my best friend and ended up teaching over there. And just as you might imagine, it completely upended my life and completely changed my life. So I came back and started teaching, and one thing led to another. I became a CEO and school superintendent. And just last month, released a book with my business partner called The Great Engagement. We'll talk a little bit about it. In fact, some of the concepts we're going to be talking about today are from our book. The subtitle is How CEOs Create Exceptional Cultures. And it's really based on the last 30 plus years of doing this work. My business partner's been doing it. I've been doing it for about 8 years now. And it's endorsed by, at the very top of the book, it's hard to see, but at the very top of the book, we've got an endorsement from Ken Blanchard, who probably is the one, more even so than Greenleaf, that made servant leadership pretty famous. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Those are my 3 kids who read, I think, all of one sentence of my book so far, but they at least were gracious enough to pose for the picture. My son's in the middle there, and that's actually my business partner's son's jersey. He's a freshman on the Michigan team this year. He didn't see a single play this year, but man, oh man, what a year to join the football team. Micah Davis is his name. He's going to be, I think, an all-star one day for Michigan. So watch out for him. Great, great kid. So let's jump into servant leadership. This has been around for a while. It's been around since the 1970s. Many of you are probably pretty familiar with it. So I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time talking about servant leadership because my guess is most of you know sort of the fundamentals. For those of you who don't, just a very high level overview that it's all about shifting from managing results to designing environments that create results. And it's a form of leadership that really replaces self-interest, like what's good for me, to what's best interest of others. How do I serve my team, as the title implies? And so, huge believer in that. And even if you're not, the results are pretty evident. And lots of uh, cases out there, lots of studies about there, lots of books about how this really does produce results. The problem is many of us get it intellectually, but it's really hard for us to live it. It's really hard for us to be that way because our humanness gets in the way. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And so if we think about that previous slide, right, that it's about creating environments that create results, what we're really talking about is culture. And Harvard's done lots of studies on this. Different people have done studies on this, but here's one that's pretty strong, that strong cultures increase profits by 756% over a period of 11 years. So pretty hard to argue with stuff like that. And there's lots of other studies that show that culture really is so critical. Peter Drucker is quoted as saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," which many of you have probably heard of. And although he didn't say it originally, he gets credited for it. But we actually think it's much bigger than that. That it doesn't just eat strategy; it eats everything else. It is the difference maker, and especially in this day and age where the world is not slowing down, things are just going faster and faster. That if you've got one thing to focus on as a leader, our advice would be to focus on culture because it is the ultimate competitive advantage. In fact, we think culture eats everything for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that's the name of our podcast, actually. If you want to check out our podcast, we talk to CEOs and leaders and superintendents across the country to unpack this subject if you're interested. So let's talk a little bit about what it is, though. So this is where we start to get participation going. All right. So be ready with your fingers and type into the chat box. What is culture? We talk a lot about it, but how would you define culture? What would be your definition of it? And this is not class, so don't worry about if your answer is right or wrong. We're here exploring the topic together. There's never a wrong answer. There's just different perspectives on it. And so we'd love to hear, if you had to define culture in maybe a few words or a few sentences, how would you define it? All right, here we go. So shared knowledge of a company's values, okay? How to approach the community, the atmosphere and relationships that exist within a specific environment. That's an interesting word, atmosphere, right? That actually gets to the heart of what makes culture difficult to change. So we'll come back to that. The environment that you create for people, communal feeling when working. There's another one of those words, feeling. Shared beliefs and behaviors, ways of life across generation. Yeah, I love that. Individualized perceptions of the environment or system, a system of values that encompasses a place, institution, company to produce a core environment for the participants and members. Yeah, awesome. I love it. Seth Godin says it's the way that we do things around here. And I kind of like that definition because it's really simple. And it kind of gets to the essence of it. There's somebody just said that how we do things here. Safe place where you feel comfortable participating. Yeah, or not. Some cultures are people don't feel very safe at all, right? There's not a lot of psychological safety. Shared attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of a collective group. Yeah, I love it. I love it. You could take all these answers and say that they're all accurate and to the point. We like to think of it as, like I said before, the Seth Godin definition, or it's the unspoken rules of engagement. It's kind of how we do things, but we don't really talk about it a lot. And when we do, we tend to be kind of superficial about it. We'll put together things that sort of directionally may point to it, but they don't actually reflect the true living, breathing culture. And many of you talked about this. It's a feeling that exists. And so that leads into the next question, which is, why is culture so darn difficult to change? What is it that makes culture so difficult to change? And I think it really gets to what several of you pointed to. It's this feeling, it's this invisible, almost intangible component. When I was a school superintendent, I was lucky. We were actually we opened two of the top 50 most innovative schools in the country, as designated by the former head of the Gates Foundation. And so we got some grant money and got to be a part of some really, really cool groups that got to travel around the country. Interestingly enough, by the way, people and always said that the trip to Detroit was the best of the trips. And we went to some pretty cool places, but Detroit was so cool and so unique, and so much was happening here. And it was so downtown was exploding in activity back then. This would have been probably about 8 years ago. That Detroit was the number one city, even though people weren't expecting much, which is probably a part of why it got such high ratings. But I could walk into a school and I could walk into a company right now and probably within 30 seconds get a pretty good feeling for what the culture was. You could almost taste it in the air. And that actually starts to give us a clue into, why is it so difficult to change? Well, we think it's because culture is mostly unconscious. It's like the iceberg analogy that we don't realize how we all go on unconscious autopilot, and we start to do things and behave in certain ways, and we don't even really realize it. Now, a lot of what I'm going to say today, you may not agree with, you may see differently, and that's totally fine. I'm not pretending like I have the answer, but I would suggest that you try it on. I would suggest that you consider some of this, because when you can start to slow down and start to think about, what's going on an unconscious level, now you're able to go to work on the root cause challenges, the root cause issues that can then create huge changes in a culture. So I'll give you an example. We were working with a CEO. He's got about 1,000 employees in multiple locations. He just happens to be in Michigan, actually, although most of our work is outside of the state of Michigan. We consultants are much smarter outside of our states. And so he was struggling with, why are they not getting the results? They've been doing this work. They've been hard at it. He's been at it for decades, great people. And he just couldn't figure out, like, why are we not producing the results that we're looking for? Not just sort of financial results, but the healthcare outcomes, and various other sort of cultural traits. And he realized in this moment of like a huge insight for him that fundamentally it was an issue where people weren't doing what they said they were going to do, that it was really a breakdown of integrity. And integrity we think of as doing what you say. Really, it's that simple. It's integrating. It shares the same root as to integrate. You're integrating your word and your action. And that people weren't doing that. They weren't doing what they said they would do. And the huge moment of insight for him as the leader was that, oh my gosh, I'm not either. I tell people I'll do something and then I get busy, quote unquote, and I don't get to it. And I excused it away, or he would explain it that he excused it away for years because he was the CEO and he was busy, and people would understand. Well, no, not the case. We follow people's behaviors more than we follow their words. And so he woke up, became conscious of this, and pretty quickly, within a few months, the results started to change because he started to do what he said he would do, which didn't mean he said yes to everything and he did everything. It meant he actually had to say no to more things. So in a sort of an ironic way, he started to say no to more things, but when he said yes, he would make sure that he fulfilled that commitment. And then his executive team followed his lead, et cetera, and it sort of cascaded throughout the organization. So that's an example of, it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be quite simple like that, but a profound impact on the entire organization. And it gets back to that iceberg analogy, that most of what happens is below our level of awareness. There's a great quote here from it's a great book if you love reading books, called The Social Animal. And it tells a story through the perspective of the unconscious mind. And so I just want to point to something really quickly here. It says, in his book, Strangers to Ourselves, Dr. Wilson of the University of Virginia writes that the human mind can take in 11 million pieces of information at any given moment. 11 million, okay? The most generous estimate is that people can be consciously aware of 40 of these. The conscious mind merely confabulates stories that try to make sense of what the unconscious mind is doing of its own accord. I mean, that's fascinating. Even if you don't agree with the numbers, double them, double the 40 and cut the 11 million in half, right? It's not even close still. And most of that is awesome. It's not a bad thing. The fact that we can drive a car and chew gum at the same time or have a conversation is absolutely astounding. It's the great gift of the human mind. So this is not a bad thing, but it does mean that we're kind of up against a challenge when it comes to becoming more conscious. We hear a lot of talk about becoming aware of our unconscious biases. Well, that's good. And we should all be pursuing that, but it's also very, very, very difficult to do that. And so part of what we need people around us to help us. So what is the source of a culture in a group or an organization? If you think about it, if you're a part of an organization of 10 people or a part of an organization of 10,000 people, what's the source? Like what's the tip of the spear? What's the fountainhead? What's the source of a culture? Again, I'm going to encourage you to throw some ideas in the chat here. The people, yeah. Leadership, leaders, yeah. Often leadership, leaders, yes. And how about even higher than the leaders, if you will? Like, well, who's at the top of the leader food chain, if you will? Vision, mission. Okay. Yeah, exactly, Tara. The CEO or the president, the CEO. That fundamentally, this is not rocket science, okay? That if you want to impact your culture, and your culture could be a team of 5 people, by the way, it doesn't need to be a huge team, but you likely have a culture and you want to influence your leadership team, which means it starts with you. It starts with you as the CEO or the leader of that particular department. And so if you're having some issues in your culture, go look in the mirror. And that's the good news and the bad news, right? It's not fun to do that, but it is the place to start. It also gives you complete control over what to do about it and where to go next. And it takes courage, that fundamentally courage is at the foundation of all of this work. It takes courage to be a leader, especially nowadays. It's getting harder and harder. The world is sort of going haywire in many regards. And so we would define courage as not the absence of fear, but as seeing the fear and doing it anyway. And so, what the heck does this have to do with leadership? Well, every single day, multiple times a day, we are triggered by some level of fear. And we may not call it that. We may call it things like, well, I'm not comfortable with that, or that makes me uncomfortable, or that's, we use deodorized words, but at the foundational level, it really is a challenge of fear. And it takes intentional activities and courage to move beyond that. And fundamentally, we are emotional beings. This is one of our assertions, is that, again, it's not a bad word. Emotion has the same root as motion. Emotions get us into motion. They get us moving. They motivate us. They move us forward. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's famous for the 5 stages of grief, she talked about that foundationally, at the foundation of all human emotions, below every other emotion you can think of, are really 2 emotions, and they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. What do you suppose those 2 emotions are at the foundation of all other emotions? Love and fear. All right, Troy, knocking out of the park right away. I love it. So yes, they are fear. And when we say fear, we like this definition. It's a mental state induced by a threat to self, real or imagined. Notice that imagined is bolded there. It's capitalized, because most of our fears nowadays are not existential threats. Very few of us, especially if we live in this great nation have very few existential threats to ourselves. But what we do have are, Sally's email to us, or she didn't copy us on the email, or that person's tweet, or somebody's post on Facebook. And we take these things in like they're attacking us, and we don't even realize it. And it triggers us. It triggers that emotional reaction. And so that's one thing to be aware of is that side of the equation. The other side is love. And when we say love, we don't mean, like Valentine's Day love, or, love between me and my wife, for instance. What we're really talking about is this idea of agape love that the Greeks coined, that it's really this idea of willful, conscious extension of oneself for the benefit or growth of another. Or does that sound familiar? That's at the foundation of servant leadership. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, is that servant leadership is built on this idea of agape love. It's all about serving my people, serving my team. And when I can do that right, then we can grow as a team. We can create the conditions, the environment that then produces results, because people feel psychologically safe. We can lean in, we can show up with our brilliance and do our jobs, and we can all support each other. So another great question here, I think, fundamentally, if you really strip away all the noise, strip away all the LinkedIn articles about this subject and the millions of books that are out there, fundamentally, what is your job as a leader? Servant or not, what is your job as a leader? Caring for others, okay? Other ideas. Helping others achieve, to listen, providing resources, guiding and support others to accomplish the mission or goal, to be an example of what it is. These are going fast. I got to keep up. Creating an environment where people feel valued. Yeah, guiding others, fostering an environment of success, preserving accountability. Yeah, these are great. These are great. None of these are wrong. They're all fantastic, and absolutely I agree. And underneath, I would argue all of those is even something even simpler, which is to help our people grow. To help our people grow. That fundamentally, it's growing those you lead, because if you want to grow as an organization, there is no such thing as an organization. We talk a lot about it, like, well, that's just the way they do things at XYZ company. Well, XYZ company doesn't exist. XYZ company is just a bunch of people who happen to work under that banner, of XYZ company. There is no Google. You can't show me Google other than maybe a legal document that formed a corporation many years ago. It's just a bunch of human beings who happen to work together. So if you want to grow the organization, if you want to get better, then it means you have to grow your people, because that's what the organization is. It's just a bunch of people. Or said differently, to help yourself and your team shift from fear to love. From fear to love, using servant leadership, which is what takes courage. It takes courage because it starts with us. And I'll use myself as an example. I was talking to my wife last year, and we were both on the phone, and I think we were both driving actually, and the connection cut off. And I thought in about 3 seconds, my brain went to, oh my gosh, she was probably in a car accident. Oh my gosh, she's probably dead. And oh my gosh, like, what does that mean? And oh, this is horrible. And da 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 da. It was amazing how quickly my brain spiraled. I'm a pretty calm, collected guy. I'm an engineer. I don't have emotions. So it was amazing how quickly I caught myself going negative like that. And it just points to that we don't realize, again, how unconscious we go to the negative. I don't know about all of you, but we all wake up with some level of fear and concern in the morning. Like today, I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go today. Is it going to be fun? Is it going to be engaging? Are people going to get value out of it? Is it going to be tough to not really be able to talk to people because we got a lot to cover? And I'm worried about my eldest daughter, and I'm worried about my mother, and we got this trip we're taking tomorrow, and all this stuff, right? So I don't have to nurture fear. I don't have to wake up and start journaling about, my fear journal. It just shows up. It just hits us in the face, whether we like it or not. Sometimes before we wake up, right, at 2 or 3 in the morning, if we're unlucky. But the other side, the love side, takes tremendous amounts of conscious effort. We have to nurture that. I was in Boston last Monday, in Southern California, Wednesday to Saturday, flew home, was home for a day, and then just spent the last 3.5 days working with or 2.5 days working with a client here in Detroit, out in Plymouth, which was awesome. Tomorrow I'm flying to Texas. Like I'm a little tired, frankly, and a little bit whiny. I'm a little bit complaining to myself. And it's because that fear just shows up. It automatically shows up. I don't have to nurture it. It's automatic. But I've gotten pretty good at slowing down, catching myself when I start complaining or whining to myself, and then shifting over to the other side and saying, well, what am I complaining about? Like I get to do the work that I love. I actually get paid to do this. It's amazing. I get to help fundamentally transform people's lives and transform organizations and transform cultures in profound ways, not because I said so, but because our clients say so. And what a gift, what an honor. And it only takes about a minute or two for me to do that. And as soon as I do, it's like the light switch flicks back on again, and I stop complaining and I move back to, okay, let's go. Now, this isn't always easy to do, right? Because we all are stuck in our comfort zone. We are all creatures of habit. My business partner's dad was a fascinating guy. I never got a chance to meet him, but he was an Air Force pilot, and at the age of, I think he was only 19, just an amazing man. And he said, we're all stuck in a fur-lined rut. It's a rut, but it's lined with fur, so it's pretty comfortable. So we kind of like it. We won't say that out loud to many people, but we do kind of like our comfort zone. And most of the time, we don't realize that we're in it. In fact, we would assert, this series is called the Leadership and Innovation series, that the biggest problem with innovation isn't actually generating new ideas. It's getting beyond our comfort zone, because that little line, or maybe sometimes it's a thick line that goes around the comfort zone. What do you suppose that represents? What's that line that's got us staying in our comfort zone? Letting go of thoughts that cause suffering, uncertainty and failure, fear, fear, fear. Yes, fear, fear, fear. It's fear. We would assert. Sometimes it's not that big of a fear. It's like, for those of us who, I just took my 3 kids down to Cedar Point this summer, and I don't really have a fear of roller coasters. Now I'm just old where I don't like them because they don't feel good. But for my little daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, right, she had a fear of going on some of the roller coasters, which is completely understandable. So the fear is not a bad thing, but it takes courage to break through it. And sometimes it's like paper thin, and sometimes it feels like a double reinforced wall, concrete wall. If you were to go and say something to the CEO, for instance, you might feel like, whoa, that's hugely fear inducing. But that's where that courage comes into place. Because what's outside of the fear? What would you say if I were to draw another circle around the comfort zone that's bigger? What do you suppose that area is called? What would you name that area? Growth. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's what we call the growth zone, or the learning zone. That if we want to grow, if we want to learn, we have to get outside of our comfort zone, which again, we can get intellectually. I'm sure many of you are like, yeah, that makes sense. But within the next 2 hours, you're going to probably face something where you're going to not want to grow. You're going to not want to do that because of the fear kicks in. The challenge is we don't even realize it. We're unconscious to it. It's like got us by the throat, and we don't even realize it. Oh, I forgot I threw this joke in here. So that fear line is really OSU, that school down south, by the way. So as leaders, our job is to become more and more aware of, one, what's driving me unconsciously, what fears are getting in my way, and 2, how do I help my people with the same thing? The challenge is most of us, rise up the leadership ranks because we're really good at getting stuff done. We're really good at problem solving. We're really good at cranking out work. Problem with that is we become the CEO. Like in my case, I was only 34 years old when I became a school superintendent, and we had about 200 employees. And I was super excited and completely terrified because I didn't really know what the heck I was doing. Um, and because we're not given the tools, like we don't know the tools of leadership. Even like in my case, I got my MBA. It was good, it was helpful, but it's still not like the pragmatic, what do you do? What's my job now as a leader? It's like a car mechanic here, right? Car mechanic can't do what they do unless they're really good at working on engines, most of them. But as leaders, we're put in leadership positions and we have no idea how the engine works. We have no idea how human beings work. We're not given the tools to work with human beings, and so we'll share a few of those tools in just a few minutes here. So if you're to influence people, right, which is at the foundation of your job as a leader, and specifically to help them grow, how do you get that? How do you get through to them if we are all operating an emotional autopilot? You actually don't have to answer this one because it's much more nuanced, and it would probably take a few paragraphs to really dive into it. But it's a great question because it gets us all thinking, well, shoot, I don't know, how do I do that? How do I reach people when myself and everybody else is sort of on this unconscious autopilot and we don't even realize it? Again, it's why 85+% of this work doesn't work, because we miss this foundational point, most of the consultants out there. Well, we would offer up really 3 tools. And as fellow engineering nerds like me, hopefully you all can appreciate a good Venn diagram. It's these are the 3 tools: leadership, management, coaching. These are not new words, I'm sure, to any of you, but hopefully the way that we think about them is a little bit different. So let's kind of walk through them for a second, and then I'll share an example or two that might be helpful. So if you think about leadership as a starting point, what is it? Like, how would you all define leadership? How would you explain leadership? I don't mean a leader. I don't mean the person. I don't mean the title, but the tool of leadership. If you think about this, like, okay, I've got a toolkit, right? I've got a hammer, I've got a saw, I've got a nail, or I've got screwdriver. Well, could you cut a piece of wood with a hammer? Yeah. Would it be a total mess and would it take you a long time? Absolutely. But we do that all the time. We take out a tool, let's say management, when leadership is needed. So we have the wrong tool for the wrong situation, then we wonder why it doesn't go well. So these 3 tools are really, really important. So let's go back to leadership. What is it? How would you define leadership? Building block of a team, defining direction, setting example, leadership knowledgeable. Yeah. If I said to you compassionate influence, yeah, I like that. If I said to you, leadership is missing, what would be missing? Guiding a group to achieve results. Okay. Yep. Other thoughts? Vision. Yeah. Followers, generating voluntary followers. I might add to that. Understanding strength and weaknesses of team, a resource and support for a team, direction. Yeah, we use these words like vision or direction. If you think about the most talented, the most gifted, the most amazing leader of the last century, in my opinion, it's Dr. Martin Luther King. He was unbelievable at leading. So what does that mean? What did he do? Well, he put out a future that others took on as their future. He put out a future that others took on as their future. He didn't get buy-in. He wasn't like, what do you guys think? Did he? He wasn't like, everybody in with me who raises their hand, who's in. No, he put out something. He put out his dream and other people took it on. He didn't have to get buy-in. He didn't have to convince people. And so that's really, really important to realize. Too often we talk about getting buy-in to a vision or selling the mission. Please don't do that. Don't get buy-in, and please don't sell the mission, because that implies that you're selling something. Put it out there and get people excited about it, and then it'll generate voluntary followership. People will get excited about it because they care about that same subject. They care about that same thing. And so leadership is all about putting a future out there, which is important to see, because without leadership, we would assert you have nothing to manage and you have nothing to coach. Leadership has to come first, because without a future, then where the heck are we going? We have no direction. We have nothing to aim at. We have no shared purpose. We have no shared future together. So this is really, really foundational. And this is the one that's most often missing. So if you've got some frustrations on your team, I'd start here. I'd think about, okay, what's missing? What's the why? We all know Simon Sinek probably, and what's the why? That's it, like right there. What's the why? Do people understand that? Do people fully own that future? We talk about it in our book that if you want to create engagement, it really comes down to two things: aspiration times empowerment. Aspiration and empowerment. If you think about aspiration, it's different than inspiration. Why is that? Well, because aspiration is something that's intrinsic to me. You don't need to inspire me. It's something that I aspire to. Well, that means, okay, then as a leader, how do I get people on my team to aspire to something bigger than themselves? Aspire to something that is in the future. Because when I do that, then I don't have to convince them. I don't have to motivate them. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that stuff. You should, to keep it alive. But fundamentally, if I aspire to something, then I don't need anybody to push me, because I'm already there. I'm already wanting it. And then the empowerment piece is the other part of it that's important, obviously, to people feel empowered to do their jobs. We don't have time to really get into that today, but that is the second critical component. So there's a great quote here from Matthew Kelly. He's one of my favorite authors. He's from Australia, so he has an unfair advantage over all of us, and that he has an awesome accent. But he says, people won't do anything until they are inspired. But once they are inspired, there's almost nothing they won't do. And I don't care what you're doing, by the way. This will be a fun question real quick. So what was the job title, you suppose, of the person in the last 8 years of me doing this work across the country? What was the job title of the person that was the most inspiring person I've met? What would you guess? It wasn't CEO, by the way. I've met some very inspiring CEOs, absolutely, but this person stands out. This really is a smart group. Exactly. It was a janitor. It was a janitor at Wayne State University in Detroit. When she talked about what she did, it was unreal. Like the whole room was just like awestruck. We were like silent. I was like, I couldn't speak. Our chins were on the table just listening to her, because she talked about how when she comes to work, she comes to throw down for these kids because they deserve honor and dignity and respect, because they're going to change the future of the world, and like on and on and on. She just talked. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. So I don't care what you do. I don't care what you're making or what you're not making. If you're in the service industry or in the product industry, doesn't matter. This is at the heart of every good organization, is that we are human beings and we want to be doing something that matters. We want to be inspired. And so as leaders, our job is to make that happen. What's the value of a mission statement? Again, I'm going to skip this in great detail, but as the hint says, not much. And what I mean by that is that this is sort of heresy in the consulting world, but most mission statements, most vision statements, most values, most purpose statements are not worth the ink that they were written with. Now, why do you suppose I say that? Well, because they don't do the job that they're supposed to do. And why is that? Well, because mission statements are actually not that old of a concept. The problem is we've taken what was supposed to be an inspirational tool and we've turned it into like a thing to do, a task, like a thing to check off the list. And I was guilty of this as much as anybody, by the way. I would take my team away every summer. We'd do like a 2-day retreat. We'd talk about mission, vision, values. I'd check it off my to-do list and be like, all right, great. We'll do this again next summer. Not realizing I completely missed the point that being on a mission is very different than having a mission statement. Mission statements are cold, and I have yet to read one. Actually, I did read one that was pretty good, but it was an entire page long. But most mission statements don't do what we're intending to do, which is to inspire, to put energy, to put spirit. Inspire is to inspire is to put spirit into somebody. And so don't rely on mission statements is my point here, okay? Leadership is an active, engaging process of everyday work, of re-energizing yourself and re-energizing your people. All right, so that's leadership. Leadership's all about putting the future out there. So then what's management? And I would assert, by the way, that and you can put your thoughts to what's management in the chat here, but I would assert that you can't manage people. So given that, what do you suppose? How would you define management? Okay, an organizer. Yeah, you're sort of organizing towards that future, right? The leadership puts out there, creating a framework to get things done, serving as a source of accountability, defining goals, keeping track of task, project, process, accountability, structure, outcomes. Yeah, awesome. All that stuff. Great alignment of resources. Fantastic. It's all that stuff. More simply put, we would offer up, it's getting people to make explicit agreements. Period. Because when you get people to make explicit agreements to do things, it takes care of all the other stuff. Now, sometimes they're built into like a job description, although we tend to skip that process and we don't actually get people to understand what the job description means and what they're accountable for. But again, that's a whole nother webinar for another day. But fundamentally, you can't manage people, but what you can manage is agreements. Or we actually like to call them promises, because when you say, I promise to do something, it kind of amps up the stakes. It makes people pucker up a little bit and take it more seriously. But use whatever word works for you. Could be promise, could be agreement, could be, agreement. So that's it. Management is getting explicit agreements to do things that are specific, have a time frame, and that they're clear. Brene Brown talks about clear as kind, being very clear about what it is that we're agreeing to. And that could be what you're agreeing to for me and what I'm agreeing to for you. And if you think about it visually, leadership goes first, right? Leadership puts that future out there. Well, then management is just all the agreements that we're going to agree to that will move us towards that future. It could be thousands of agreements that will move us towards that future. And accountability, it's not one of those fun words, like if I bring up the word accountability, the room doesn't get all excited like we're going to Disneyland. No, it's usually one of those words that people get like, oh boy, this is not going to be fun. This is not going to be a fun conversation. Because usually it means blame. It's like, okay, somebody needs to be held accountable. Well, somebody needs to be fired, is what that means, especially in a political context or in our sort of public world. And so, which is unfortunate because accountability is crucial. It's critical. You'll see articles out there that'll say things like, leaders are good and managers are bad. That's garbage at best, in my opinion. You need both. You need all three. You need leadership, you need management, you need coaching. So it's not that management is bad, it's just being done very poorly in most organizations. And it's why we're killing the spirit of our people. It's why Gallup just did a study last year that talked about the percent of people who are engaged in their jobs. What do you suppose that is? What percent of workers sort of coast to coast are engaged in their work? %, 30%. We're headed in the right direction. 25%. Yeah, good. 23%. I mean, it's pathetic. It's so sad. It like bums me out, but it also means that it keeps us very busy. But it's 23%. It's just sad. And 51% of people are actively looking for new jobs. Like 51%. Like think about that. It's mind-boggling. And so we got a problem, right? We got a problem. And a lot of it gets back to because we're managing situations and people, and we can't manage people. And people don't want to be managed, and we're not leading. And so This is so simple and such a huge game changer that we've got to stop managing people and we got to start leading people more and then getting simple agreements with people. That's where the accountability lies. And then we leaves us with coaching. Okay. So for time's sake, I'll just give you our definition of coaching because it's really complicated. You ready? Coaching is everything else. Coaching is everything else. Okay. This is super simple. Leadership, putting a future out there. Management, getting people to make agreements to move towards that future. Coaching, everything else. Now, there is one key element of coaching that's most often missing and people don't get. And many of you might push back on this idea, which is fine. Coaching is only coaching if it's asked for. Coaching is only coaching if it's asked for. This is so critical, you all. I can't stress this enough that too often, and we frame it this way, right? Like I've got books on my shelf back here, right? Crucial Conversations and I forget the other ones that are famous. Anyway, they're all like, difficult conversations. They're all like out of the gate, like this huge negative baggage, right? It doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. It doesn't have to be this big, heavy thing. That the job of leadership is to, and management, frankly, you can use both, is to generate coaching, is to generate people looking for help. None of us know everything. Very few of us know very much at all, frankly. And so we got to let go of this. Like we need to know stuff because that's just the old way of thinking. This is a new generation, a new world. The world is moving fast, fast, fast with AI and everything else. What we know is becoming less and less important. But our ability as leaders to facilitate teams that can work together on problems to generate answers is the key, is I think, the foundation to success going forward, which means we got to create a coaching culture. We've got to create cultures where people can just let their guard down and help each other because none of us knows everything and that's okay. It's quite all right. The janitor can give coaching to the CEO. And in great organizations, that's exactly what happens and vice versa. So would love to jump into this. If you all have questions later, we can certainly jump into that. Or if you've got questions now, feel free to chime in because I know this one's a hard one for many people because we all think, well, they work for me. They can't say no to me. Well, they can, and you should let them because if they're not open to it and you give it to them anyway, it damages the relationships and you just damage the foundation of good leadership is the relationship. Every professional athlete and exceptional CEO has a coach. For those of you who are CEOs out there or superintendents or presidents of nonprofits, we have a monthly group that we convene from across the country of amazing, very humble leaders who get this concept, who don't pretend like they have the answers. And it's a lot of fun. We have a monthly meeting. If you're interested, let me know. I'm happy to tell you more about it. This is our book, as I mentioned. If you're interested in picking it up, it's out there on Amazon, obviously, or you can go to our website for it, thegreatengagementbook.com, to learn more about it. This is my wife and our dog checking out the book. So with that, I wanted to make sure we left plenty of time for sort of dialogue and discussion and pushback and ways of looking at things differently and disagreement and all that fun stuff. So let me close down the PowerPoint here and we can just have a discussion. So, and in this case, you can put the questions in the chat, but I'd actually love to just talk to you as human beings. So if you turn off I don't know how it works, but if you can raise your hand maybe, and we can have an actual discussion. All right. So while we do that, Brandon says, do you think the way we define individuals' roles in organizations limits the ease to engage in coaching up and down the organization? I think the way we define individuals' roles. I'm not sure if I understand exactly what you mean, Brandon. So let me take a stab at it and then you can jump in here. I think hierarchies absolutely get in the way of coaching because why? Fear. I can't say that. The boss is in the room or the boss's boss is in the room, right? And in some cases, that's true. It's a very real fear, and you should think very consciously about it because if you've seen people get fired for speaking up in front of the boss, probably not a good idea to speak up. Probably a better idea to go get a better job, by the way, or convince that CEO to hire us and we'll help fix him or her. But yeah, I think that fears can be very real. Now, the question is to slow down and to think, okay, if I speak up, am I really going to be fired? And most of the time, the answer is no. So what does that mean? Well, most of the time, it just means that we're afraid for not really a good reason. We're afraid because for lots of reasons, but most of them are imaginary. Most of them were made up in our heads. Um, and if we really speak up, that's actually exactly what leaders are looking for. I would have loved those courageous people on my team when I was a superintendent. I wanted more of those people. I wanted more people being willing to speak up, to muster the courage to speak their mind, because I didn't know everything. And I was at the shielded from a lot of it because I'm at the top of the food chain, if you will. And so I would have loved more folks like that. So if there's something in your way, I would encourage you to stop and think about, what am I afraid of? What am I actually afraid of? And then go to the next step, which is, okay, well, is that a fear that's worth stopping me? Is that a fear that's worth getting in my way from moving forward? Other questions? Come on, y'all. I'm not talking to a bunch of Ohio State folks. This is University of Michigan, the leaders and best. You got thoughts out there. So let's have a discussion. All right. Brand, I'm not sure how this works. Can you unmute yourself and just jump in?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry, I got pulled away for something, so I'm doing two things at once. But yeah, you kind of got to some of what my question was aiming at, but I feel like a lot of times the way that organizations define an individual's role within that organization is like a list of responsibilities or outcomes or things that they want them to accomplish for the organization. And I feel like that when you're talking about coaching and how like someone in say a custodial role should be able to coach the CEO and that communication should be welcomed, I feel like a lot of times the barrier that I've encountered in my work career is that someone defines it's not your role to work outside of your responsibilities, or like if I have something that I want to work on or something that I think I have input into, I've seen it time and time again where they're like, well, that's not your role here, you should be focused on your set of responsibilities. So like, if you're communicating about this thing, then you're not taking care of the things I want you to take care of, and I'd rather you do that than focus on the things that you care about. And I feel like that push and pull of an individual's strengths being fostered versus the responsibilities that are on like their checklist of duties, it creates that barrier and that tension between that up and down communication.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. Makes a ton of sense. And so what I would argue that's missing there is gets back to management. Do we agree to having this, to pursuing a coaching culture? Do we agree that this is a good idea? And so if you don't have that agreement out of the gate, if you don't have like a base level agreement, then you're probably not going to make much progress. Now, the other thing that could be going on there is that we all think we're right. We are all reality generating machines. Because if you think about it, if I'm wrong about something, I learned that 2 + 2 does not actually equal 5, it equals 4. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I'm going to change my mind to be like, okay, 2 + 2 = 4. And now I'm right again. So we're always right. And we think that we're right, which means that other people are probably wrong. And so if we bring an emotional energy to something like, hey, you should do this, or have you thought about doing this? And there's an emotional energy of like, you should do it this way because you're wrong, dummy. Then yeah, it's going to be hard for people to listen to that as coaching. So one of the beauties of coaching, I know I've coached CEOs, I've coached, doctors. I know nothing about medicine. I've coached, lawyers, experts in lots of different areas that I was not an expert in. So one of the things about coaching is that we have to let go of that desire to be right. And a lot of times people won't, I'll throw out an idea and they will do nothing with it. And that's okay, because it's not my decision to make. My decision is to provoke thinking, is to get them thinking about something, maybe coming at it from a different perspective. But at the end of the day, they have to make a decision that works for them and in their context. And that's part of what makes a coaching culture work is it's not a different way to convince people to do what you want. It's genuinely hey, have you thought about this? Or here's a different way of thinking about it. But most often what's missing is a base level agreement in the first place. And that's not always easy to do. My wife and I actually sat down about 6 years ago to have this conversation. How do we help each other grow? And do we want to? Do we want to help each other grow? And it took us a while, but we finally agreed that, yeah, that'd be a great gift. And lots of great fruit has come from that. Kirk, yeah, jump in.
Yeah, just maybe I don't know if it's a quick question or not, but how do you under the putting a future out there kind of mind scope, how do you keep people motivated if if we all are in agreement that the achievement or the future is attainable, if it moves forward then takes 5 steps backwards, how do you keep the people motivated inside of that? What would be a next step if it looks like it's going to be slowed down, but still people are bought into, the idea of the future?
Yeah. So Zig Ziglar has the best advice on this one, Kirk, I think. He said, people complain that the effects of leadership, right, which is primarily inspiration, don't last. But neither do the effects of taking a shower, but we recommend it daily. And I think that's the answer right there, Kirk, is that leadership is not a one and done thing. We got to do it sometimes multiple times a day. We got to remind ourselves, why the heck are we doing this? Because sometimes we get burnt out. Sometimes we get overwhelmed, and is this possible? And are we making progress? And we get exhausted. And that's okay. The trick is to wake up, muster the courage to go back at it again the next day. And so we've got to be constantly leading. We got to be constantly putting that future out there. It doesn't mean that we always have to generate it, by the way, as leaders or as CEOs, but have other people do it. Ask other people a simple question like, hey, why do you do this job? Like if you walk around, if you got a few hundred employees and you just start walking around and asking people like, hey, why do you do this job? Why do this versus anything else? And just get curious and ask them questions and listen to them. You'll be astounded at what people will tell you. And that's a great fodder for more, for more of that inspiration. It doesn't have to always come from the top. Nate asked, can a toxic culture at a company be fixed without changing leadership? Well, that's a awfully loaded question, Nate. If it's toxic, the CEO probably doesn't get that. They probably don't see the same thing that you see. So the answer is very likely no, because they have to see a different future, which you can help them to see, right? But it doesn't mean it's easy. But yes, absolutely. If the leader, specifically like in our work, we won't do any work with a company unless the CEO or whoever's at the top hires us directly. Because we know if they're not bought in, if they're not on board and they want to move towards a better future, and most of the time they're doing well, like they're doing great. They just feel like they're kind of plateaued or they stuck and they want to go to another level. Then if they're interested in going to that next level, wherever it is, whether it's at the toxic level or it's at the really high performing level, if they're committed to it, then yes, this works. Like in our case, we think every single time. The only time it hasn't worked is 2 times in the last about 30 years. It's when they got scared and they ran away. They literally disengaged and we couldn't get them to call us back, halfway through the process. But otherwise, it can absolutely work. All right, Liz, I know there's only like a minute left, so we should probably wrap up, huh?
I think so. Thank you so much, Tom. That was such a fantastic presentation. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. We hope to see you next month for March installment on Mindful Communications. It is on March 21st. And with that, have a great day, everyone.